Alright, this will be a video on how to do layers. We just had the discussion in the PowerPoint, what layers are, what they're about, and this is how to set up layers and to apply layers in AutoCAD. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm trying to do this as quick as possible. I only have 15 minutes on the recording, so we'll get going on this immediately. So right here is the layer layers panel that we have talked about in the discussion. From here we can control, we can match layers, we can make layers current, a bunch of different stuff in here, but the main focus right now, I want you to look at this bar right here. This is a great test question. Whatever layer is showing here is the active or the current layer, active or current layer. So anything drawn at this point will be on the 0 layer. And right next to that we have layer properties, and this is where we're going to establish our layer properties. So I'll go ahead and select that and open up the layer properties box. And this is one of the tool palettes I keep open constantly to work in and out of. Okay, so what we see the same thing that we had here in the layer window or the drop down. We just have the one layer. So I want to show that to you. In the layer properties box, we also should show one layer. We have some settings in that we can use. We can turn on and off a layer. We'll show that in a little bit. We can freeze a layer, we can lock a layer, we can stop it from plotting or printing, we can change the color, we can change the line type or the line weight in here, we can freeze it in a viewport. So a bunch of options that we'll get into in this class, or some of these we'll get into this class. So let's go ahead and set up a new layer. So we have 4 little boxes up here. If you hover over those boxes, you can see what they do. This first one here is one we're going to work on right now. If we hover over it, says make a new layer, create a new layer. So I'm going to left click on that, and I'm going to, you can see a blue box immediately, and we know a blue box means it's asking for information. So I can go ahead and type in what I'm going to name this layer. I'm going to name it object, my object layer, and then I'm going to change that color on that object to a color. Now I wouldn't suggest these colors in a regular CAD drawing. Most CAD drawings, other than presentation drawings, are black and white or grays. But I'm going to show this so you can see this better on the screen. I'll change it to this cyan color, and OK. And then I'm going to change the line, leave the line type the same, but I'm going to change the line weight in this example to a heavier line weight. Again, this is just for example, so you can see it on the screen. All right, so we did that, and we're going to go ahead and make another layer. I left click on the box again. Now, one thing I want you to notice, this layer, the object layer, is what I was on. And when I created a new layer, I'll do it again. This is the one that's highlighted, the object layer. And it duplicates the exact settings that were in the layer that was selected. That's one thing I don't like about AutoCAD, but that's the way it is. If the 0 layer was selected, and I went to make a new layer, it would duplicate the 0 layer. So whatever layer is selected, it will duplicate. So we'll go ahead and we're going to go change the name on this third layer that we've already made, and I'm going to change that to the dim or dim style layer, or dimension layer, excuse me, the dim layer. And that one I'm going to change the color on, and I'm going to go ahead and choose another color that you might be able to see on the monitor as well. And then I'm going to go down here to layer 2 that we made, double click inside of that, and I'll change that name to the text layer. And again, that duplicated the previous layer that it was on. And I want to change the color on that, and I'll change that to a color. Hopefully you can see all right. And I'm going to take the line weight back to default layer and for the text. Hit OK. Then we got one other layer that we made, and we'll call that what? Let's call that circles. Circle layer, and we will change the color on that as well so you can see that. And we'll go ahead and make that a red, which I do not recommend for drawings. In fact, I don't want them in drawings because of various reasons we can talk about later. And again, I'll change the line weight to something a little less than the object layer, but a little more than the default layer. Hopefully you'll be able to see that. So I have a zero layer, the second one is dim, object, text, and circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. And if I go out of my properties box, I will see these 5 layers set up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers. All right, and I want to kind of remember there are 5 layers there. I'm going to show you something else in a second. So let's look at, repeat again, whatever active layer is here is what you're going to draw on. So the zero layer is active, and I'm going to go ahead and do a line, and I'll do a circle, and I'll do a polyline, and then I'll put some text in using the text command like I like you to do. Text start point and text height I'll set at 1.0 and no rotation on it, and I'll just put test. All right. So now we have all these. We're all on the zero layer. If we weren't sure if it was on the zero layer, we could select the object, look right up here. It would tell you what layer it's on. Also tells you in the properties panel what layer it's on as well. And of course, you can always go to your properties that I already have open and check in there. It gives you the color and the layer that it is on. It gives you all the other information that we discussed. If I select the line, the same thing. It's on the zero layer, etc. So now, how are we going to use these other layers that we've created here? So the first thing we're going to show you is how to assign something to a layer. So we have these, what I'm going to call our objects line. So this line here and this line, this polyline here, still on the zero layer, but I want it on my object layer. So I do the drop down on this and select object, and there we go. So I have it on the object layer. If you remember, on the object layer, I made the line weight at 1.0, and it's not showing. So if you remember, we have to toggle line weights on. So we'll go ahead and do that. The circle, I made a circle layer. We'll select the circle that's on the zero layer, and then we'll assign it to the circle layer. And that one was a little bit heavier, wasn't quite as heavy, but you can see if I toggle line weights on and off, it gets thicker. And then the last one we had was a text layer, and I'll select the word test, or the text, and assign it to the text layer. So now we have all these selected, and we can prove this by selecting one of the geometric figures. Look up here, let me go back, looking up here, the zero layer is active, but if we select a object, it shows us what layer it's on here. It also shows us in the layer properties and the line weight, and of course the line type on there. So we know what layer it's on. We can always also, if we don't believe that, we can go to the color or to the properties and check the color, which is by layer, which is the cyan, yeah. And then the object layer, the layer that's on is object. So there's a bunch of ways to check it, and that's one way to get things on a layer. All right, I only have a few minutes left here before the time runs out. So let's look at 2 other things. One, how can we avoid that step of assigning something? So if we make a layer active by doing the drop down, and we'll use the circle as let's use the dimension. We're going to do that next anyway. We'll make the dimension layer active. We don't have a dimension here. And what I want you to remember again, we have these 5 layers: zero, circle, dim, object, and text. Just remember that as well. But we'll make the dim layer active by selecting it from the drop down. And now anything we draw will be on the dimension layer. Well, we want dimensions on the dimension layer, so I'm going to go ahead and make a dimension here. And select that, and we'll go ahead and dimension this one piece here. And we have 3.5 inches. All right. So we know that this is on the dimension layer because we drew it with the dimension layer active. And again, we can also check it and look at our properties in the 2 places that it is on the dimension layer. All right, so that's the way you would make a layer active. Let's make the circle layer active, and we'll draw a line. Well, since the circle layer is active, that line is still on the circle layer. Now, I don't know if you noticed in the drop down, but now I have 6 layers. I have zero, circle, dims, object, and text, and depth points. Depth points was not in there originally, and it's no magic trick. Depth points, and I'll explain it later in lecture what it's for, but depth points are not, depth point layer is not in an original drawing. It will not show up until you make the first dimension. And if you erase the dimension, it will still stay there. And we'll talk about depth points in the lecture. But that is the layers. That is how to draw with a layer instead of drawing everything on the 0 layer. First of all, this is how to make a layer active by doing the drop down and selecting the layer you want. And anything you draw on the active layer will stay on the active layer until it's switched. If you make a mistake and put it on the wrong layer, no big deal. So this line is on the circle layer, and it should be on the object line. So I can do one of two things. I can do a match properties, as I showed you before, or I can select the line and get it on the correct layer by going to the drop down and select object. Now it is on the correct layer. So it's no big deal if you forget to switch layers. So let's say I was on the object layer and I was doing a bunch of work and putting things on the object layer, and I went over and did a regular line work and maybe connected some stuff and was doing some work, and I said, oh, you know what, I need a dimension. I went ahead and went to dimensions immediately, and I go, wow, that one is on the wrong layer. Man, that looks terrible. But all I have to do is either do a match properties from one that's in here, or if I don't have one, select it, do the drop down, and then go to the DEMS, and that will modify that as well. So that is layers. Write down any questions that you have, and we'll discuss it in class. But I wanted to show you this video. I think the easiest way to go through this and give you an introduction to layers. We discussed in the PowerPoints what layers are all about and the purpose of layers. And now you see how to set up and to modify geometric figures, text, and dimensions to get them on the right layer. Hopefully that was helpful for you. Layers are very powerful. Do not be afraid of layers. Layers, as I say often in classes, layers are your friends. And as you get into industry, they'll have as many or even more of 200 layers that they'll be working in. And they have a purpose. We'll discuss more in detail in class, as I said. So hopefully that was helpful. Thank you for listening. I do appreciate your time, and let me know of any questions. Take care.